telling her own story the way she did and the way she's about to with her biopic, it just like, I don't know.
What if Hollywood's sweetheart wasn't so sweet behind the scenes? What if the courtroom became her playground? And the real goal wasn't justice, but revenge? It started with a lawsuit, but it spiraled into something much darker. Denied motions, secret subpoenas, accusations of smear campaigns, and at the center of it all, Blake Lively. This isn't just celebrity drama. It's a calculated legal war waged with one goal: complete control. And now even her own fans are asking, how far is too far? Hollywood scandals are nothing new, but this one started quietly. No camera flashes, no press conference, just a stack of papers filed in a New York courthouse. At the center of it all, Blake Lively. The documents looked ordinary at first. They talked about reputational damage, legal concerns, and the need to protect her image. But then came the first twist. There were no defendants, not a single person named, not one company officially accused. Just a legal complaint, floating in a courtroom. But here's where things got interesting. That filing gave Blake subpoena power, and within days, she started using it. Not on the people who supposedly harmed her, but on others. Former colleagues, industry insiders, people who had been quietly working behind the scenes. One of the first was Stephanie Jones. She wasn't a producer, she wasn't a public figure, but she had worked with people close to the film. And apparently, that was enough. 4 days after the lawsuit appeared, Stephanie's entire phone was subpoenaed. Photos, messages, everything. The case wasn't about getting justice. It was about getting access. Legal experts began whispering, this wasn't a case to be won in court. It was a pressure tactic, a weapon disguised as a lawsuit. There was no intent to take it to trial. No judge, no jury, just legal tools used to shake people, rattle reputations, and send a message. And the message was loud and clear. I may not control the film, but I control the narrative. Behind closed doors, the film's team started talking. Whispers of confusion, concern, even fear. What was this really about? Was it about protecting Blake's name or something else entirely? People who had worked with her described the move as strategic, not emotional, calculated. This wasn't about a personal grudge. This was a power move by someone determined to reshape the outcome of a movie, a controversy, and her career. The lawsuit, it turned out, was only the beginning, because what followed next took the industry by surprise. As the lawsuit made its quiet entrance into the legal system, Blake Lively wasted no time turning it into a full-blown legal assault. What started as a vague complaint became a strategic storm of motions, subpoenas, and demands. And if you looked closely, you could see a pattern, one that legal experts call litigation warfare. Instead of focusing on one courtroom, Blake scattered her legal demands across the country, from New York to California to Georgia. She wasn't just targeting people involved in the case. She was targeting people around the case, former employees, third-party vendors, even lawyers and PR consultants. Anyone who had even a whisper of connection to the film became a potential witness or a target. She filed motion after motion, demanding documents she knew the court had no jurisdiction over. Subpoenas were issued in states that had nothing to do with the case, and then rushed back to a New York judge who, by law, couldn't enforce them. Legal professionals were baffled. Why file motions you know will be denied? Why demand evidence from jurisdictions you know can't respond? The answer? Harassment through process. By flooding the courts with paperwork, Blake's team was able to drag the legal timeline out, increase legal fees, and pressure the opposing side to either settle or break. She demanded documents protected by attorney-client privilege, something that courts rarely allow. She pushed for access to internal investigations that had nothing to do with her. And when denied, she filed again, and again, and again. One judge even called it out in court. Blake's team was attempting to force compliance by sheer volume, knowing full well that many of the motions wouldn't stick. But this wasn't just about law, it was about public perception. Every denied motion became a headline. Every legal filing another thread for online speculation. To the outside world, it looked like she was the victim being stonewalled. But to those inside the courtroom and those receiving the subpoenas, it felt like something else entirely. A calculated campaign to overwhelm and intimidate. And Blake wasn't done. The deeper the resistance, the harder she pushed. Because what she really wanted was just coming into focus. If the lawsuit was the match, the subpoenas were the gasoline. Once Blake Lively had subpoena power, she didn't just use it, she unleashed it. The targets? A sprawling list of people and companies, many of whom had only a distant link to the case. Former Wayfair employees, third-party investigators, PR teams, even entire law firms. And it wasn't just who she was targeting, it was how she was doing it. Instead of filing through the proper legal channels in the relevant states, like California or Georgia, where many of the targets lived or worked, Blake's legal team kept returning to New York. Over and over again, they asked the same judge to enforce subpoenas that were clearly outside his jurisdiction. And each time they were met with the same answer: no. The judge denied her motions to compel, then denied another and another. Legal observers were stunned. This wasn't a mistake. This was strategy. File everywhere. Hope someone flinches. And when they push back, just move the goalpost. One motion tried to force Wayfair to turn over details from an internal investigation, a move that would breach attorney-client privilege. Another demanded documents from law firms that weren't even directly involved in the original complaint. She even went after private communications between legal teams and their clients, a line rarely crossed in any court. And yet she kept filing. Each rejection only seemed to fuel the fire. She subpoenaed documents she already knew were confidential. She demanded responses before deadlines even arrived. And when those requests were rightfully denied, her legal team spun the story, painting it as a cover-up, as obstruction. Behind the scenes, her strategy was clear. Overwhelm the system, bury the other side in paperwork, make them look guilty through volume alone. But in court, it started to backfire. Judges weren't buying it. Her motions weren't just being denied, they were being criticized. The court began questioning her tactics. And outside the courtroom, critics wondered aloud, was this really a case about justice? Or a carefully crafted campaign to punish anyone who stood in her way? One thing was becoming obvious. Blake wasn't just playing hardball, she was rewriting the playbook. And the cost? It was rising fast for everyone involved. While the public saw headlines about subpoenas and legal filings, those close to the production whispered a different story. One that began long before any courtroom drama. To them, this wasn't just a lawsuit, it was the end result of a power struggle that had been brewing for months. From the very beginning of filming, Blake Lively walked onto the set with more than just her lines memorized. She arrived with a vision. A clear, commanding vision for what the film should look like, how it should be presented, and how the characters, especially hers, should evolve. According to multiple sources who worked on the project, Blake wasn't content just playing the lead. He wanted input on everything, from the tone of each scene to the placement of props. The crew described it as intense, hands-on, and in some cases, disruptive. The friction reached a boiling point over one pivotal issue: the dailies. Dailies are raw, unedited clips captured during filming, typically reviewed by the director and editorial team to ensure everything is on track. They're sensitive material, and access to them is strictly controlled. Blake reportedly demanded access to the dailies. Justin Baldoni, the film's director, declined. And that, according to insiders, was the moment everything changed. The set, once collaborative, became tense. Communications cooled. Meetings became confrontational. Blake began asserting more influence, requesting changes to shots, challenging directorial decisions, and even, according to some crew members, giving direction to other actors. She wanted to be in the director's chair, one source said bluntly, This wasn't about ego, it was about positioning. Because while Sony was distributing the film, the rights to the original book and its potential sequels belonged to Baldoni. And from what insiders have said, Blake knew that. She knew that directing the first film could put her in the perfect position to pitch herself as the director of the sequels. But she didn't get that role. And that's when things took a darker turn. Shortly after being denied access to the dailies, Blake filed her lawsuit. It named no defendants, but gave her legal power, including subpoena access. Almost immediately, she started targeting people close to Baldoni. Industry insiders saw the writing on the wall. This wasn't a lawsuit filed in defense. It was a lawsuit filed in response. A countermeasure after her attempt to take creative control had failed. And then came the fallout. At the film's premiere, Justin Baldoni was absent. The cast seemed divided. Social media accounts were suddenly unfollowing one another. Blake had severed digital ties with Baldoni, and other cast members followed her lead. Promo material no longer showed the full team. The internet noticed. So did the press. Articles speculated about a rift. Fans wondered if something bigger was happening behind the scenes. And all signs pointed back to the set and to the quiet war for control happening between the director and the star. Blake, sources say, wasn't just trying to influence a film. She was trying to shape her future. She saw the franchise's potential, the sequels, the streaming deals, the awards. And she wanted a seat at the top, maybe even the seat. And when that didn't happen, she didn't walk away. She went to court. In her legal filings, Blake Lively painted a dramatic picture. A coordinated smear campaign designed to destroy her image, orchestrated by Justin Baldoni's team and amplified across social media. According to her narrative, there were shadow operatives behind Reddit threads, anonymous Twitter accounts pushing false narratives, and influencers subtly shifting public opinion. She even claimed that a PR crisis firm had been hired specifically to target her and rewrite the online narrative in Justin's favor. It sounded explosive, sinister, personal. But then the evidence started coming in, and the story didn't quite line up. Blake pointed to a company called Street Relations, run by crisis manager Jed Wallace. Her lawsuit suggested that this team had been hired days before a wave of anti-Blake content started surfacing online. She claimed this was proof, a smoking gun showing intent to sabotage her reputation. Except the timeline didn't match. Emails provided in legal filings showed that Jed Wallace wasn't even looped into the conversation until August 8th, 2 full days after the premiere of the film, and well after the online backlash had already started. What's more, the PR contract they agreed to, known as Quote 2, was focused on reactive engagement, not offensive attacks. The agreement was clear. The team would monitor negative posts, engage with fan communities, and help redirect attention back to the movie. There was nothing in the paperwork about targeting Blake. Nothing about retaliation, nothing about smearing. In fact, Wallace's own email stated the focus was Wayfair-centric, referring to the film company, not Blake herself. The firm was hired to protect an investment, not to destroy an actress. Even the payment plan contradicted her claims. The firm Blake, accused of masterminding the attacks, had been hired after the controversy had already erupted. According to Jed Wallace's affidavit, they barely had time to act, and in the end, their services were barely used at all. So where was the smear campaign? Critics began asking whether Blake was conflating damage control with personal vendetta. When a film is in crisis, studios often bring in PR professionals to salvage its reputation. And in this case, it was Blake's own behavior, including the lawsuit, that had created a storm of public backlash. As one legal expert put it, defending yourself publicly isn't defamation, it's survival. But Blake wasn't buying it. She escalated further, claiming even the attorneys themselves were part of the conspiracy. She began issuing subpoenas for financial records, phone data, and even internal law firm communications. It was no longer about proving a smear campaign. It was about proving she'd been targeted, whether the evidence supported it or not. And slowly, what began as a battle over a movie started to look more like a mission for vindication. The only problem? No one could find the war Blake claimed she was fighting. If Blake Lively's lawsuit had started as a strike against a co-star, it was now veering into something far more explosive, an attack on the very people trying to defend him. Enter Brian Friedman, one of the most respected entertainment attorneys in the business, and the man representing Justin Baldoni and the Wayfair parties. His firm wasn't just handling the defense. They were pushing back, filing responses, producing evidence, and exposing inconsistencies in Blake's claims. And then Blake did something no one expected. She subpoenaed him. Personally, not just for emails, not just for call logs. She demanded financial records, media communications, internal firm documents, and even phone metadata. It wasn't a narrow request. It was a legal fishing expedition aimed directly at the heart of the opposition. Legal experts were stunned. Why go after a defense lawyer's law firm? The answer, according to Brian's legal team, was simple: intimidation. In their fiery motion to quash the subpoena, Friedman's firm accused Blake of using litigation not to uncover truth, but to punish and destabilize. They pointed to her attempts to dig into privileged communications, confidential strategy sessions, and internal discussions that had nothing to do with the actual claims. And they didn't hold back. They called her subpoena breathtakingly overbroad, legally unsound, and a transparent effort to weaponize discovery. They warned that targeting opposing counsel was not only unethical, it risked undermining the very foundation of the legal process. But there was one sentence in their letter that stood out above all. It's unclear why a smear campaign would even be actionable, unless the real goal here is to silence criticism. In other words, if you're in the public eye and people talk about you, that's not a crime. It's free speech. And unless Blake could prove that what was being said was both false and malicious, her entire argument would collapse. But she kept pushing. She insisted that Friedman was part of a conspiracy, that the defense wasn't just defending. They were fueling the media narrative against her. Her filings grew more aggressive, her requests more invasive. She wanted not just to win the lawsuit, she wanted to discredit the team standing in her way. And once again, the court wasn't convinced. Judges began pushing back. They denied multiple motions, reminded her of legal boundaries, and questioned the relevance of her demands. Still, Blake pushed forward, digging deeper, casting wider nets, and treating opposition lawyers like enemies on the battlefield. What had started as a workplace dispute was quickly becoming a war on the very system meant to resolve it. By now, the legal chaos surrounding Blake Lively had taken on a life of its own. Headlines, court drama, fan speculation, denied motions, and mounting subpoenas. But beneath all the noise, a quiet theory began to circulate among those who'd worked closest to the project. This was never really about harassment. It wasn't even about personal revenge. It was about positioning for the future. Sources close to the production revealed that Blake had her eyes not just on the film she was starring in, but on the franchise it could launch. The original book, It Ends With Us, was a massive bestseller, with sequels, spin-offs, and cinematic potential that could stretch for years. Whoever controlled the franchise could shape its legacy and cash in on every step. And Blake wanted that control. According to insiders, she saw this project as her pivot from actress to power player. Much like Reese Witherspoon with Big Little Lies, Blake was reportedly building a strategy to position herself as a producer, a creative lead, and eventually a director. She didn't just want to be part of the story, she wanted to own it. The problem? Justin Baldoni held the rights. Not Sony, not the studio, Justin. He had acquired the rights to the Colleen Hoover book years earlier, meaning no sequel could move forward without his approval. And reportedly, that was a deal breaker for Blake. Sources claim her tension with Justin wasn't just creative, it was strategic. She allegedly fought for more say in everything: casting decisions, scene direction, set design. She wanted to prove she could helm the project from the inside and use that as leverage to take over the sequel. But when she was denied access to the dailies, insiders say that's when the shift occurred. That's when her behavior changed. That's when lawyers got involved. That's when pressure started building. Because if she couldn't control the film through collaboration, maybe she could control it through conflict. Suddenly, what looked like a lawsuit for reputational harm started to look more like a hostile takeover attempt, fought not on the set, but in the courtroom. Every motion, every subpoena, every press headline served to tighten the noose around the people she saw as obstacles. She wasn't just litigating, she was repositioning, rewriting the power structure, reshaping the cast of decision makers, and in the process, burning bridges to build a throne. The irony? In trying to position herself for the sequel, she may have damaged her chances permanently. Because while studios respect ambition, they fear instability. And in Hollywood, your reputation is currency. Once it's spent, there's no refund. By now, Blake Lively's campaign had become bigger than a lawsuit, bigger than a movie. The courtroom moves, the PR swings, the mounting legal costs, all of it was supposed to result in power, in control. But instead, Blake found herself surrounded by silence. People began backing away. Colleagues were hesitant to speak publicly. Sources say former allies declined to get involved in her legal maneuverings. Even the very castmates who once stood beside her on red carpets were keeping their distance. And the courts, they weren't playing along. Judge after judge rejected her motions. They reminded her of jurisdiction boundaries. They reaffirmed attorney-client protections. And most importantly, they refused to bend the system to suit her strategy. Legal analysts pointed out that her filings were no longer helping her case. They were damaging it. Overreaching discovery, overly broad subpoenas, questionable tactics against law firms. Even those sympathetic to her at first began to ask, where was this all going? Because while her original claims involved emotional harm and workplace tension, they'd now ballooned into a sprawling legal war with no clear finish line. And behind the scenes, the sequel, the very thing she allegedly wanted control of, was becoming increasingly out of reach. If there's one constant in Hollywood, it's ambition. It's what builds careers, lands roles, and drives stars to rise. But when ambition crosses a line, when it stops being strategic and starts being destructive, the spotlight turns cold. Blake Lively, once seen as the poised and polished face of prestige projects, had now become the centerpiece of a messy public legal feud. And it wasn't just about defending her name anymore, it was about dismantling others. The lawsuit had created a vortex that pulled in former coworkers, directors, law firms, PR agents, and even people barely connected to the film. The narrative shifted from one of mistreatment to one of manipulation. In trying to control the story, she'd lost control of the narrative. Insiders now say that future deals, sequel rights, and production partnerships are in question. The energy around her name had changed, not because she filed a lawsuit, but because of how she wielded it. It's one thing to protect your reputation, it's another to try and weaponize perception and lose sight of the fallout. What began as a quiet filing in a New York courthouse quickly unraveled into one of the most bizarre legal dramas the entertainment world has seen in years. But maybe this was never about the court. Maybe it was never about justice. From the moment Blake Lively stepped onto that set, there were whispers that she wanted more than a role, that she was aiming for legacy, control, creative power, and maybe, in her mind, the lawsuit was the way to get it. But power comes at a price. And in chasing control, she may have lost something far more valuable: trust, credibility, and the quiet respect that sustains long careers. Now, as the dust settles and the court rejections pile up, one question remains: was this a fight for justice or a battle to rewrite the credits? Let us know what you think in the comments. Was Blake Lively exposing real misconduct or using the legal system to reshape her career path? Hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives, and don't forget to turn on the bell so you never miss a moment of the drama behind the curtain. Thanks for watching.